Chav Pasuk Aleph. Vayivok b'nei Yisrael kol ha'edo. Midbar Tzin. The Bnei Yisrael had come kol ha'edo. The whole congregation. So Rashi makes the point that this is in the 40th year, where that anybody between 20 and 60 already had passed away. This is the new generation that's qualified to go into Eretz Yisrael. And they came to Midbar Tzin. The Tzin Desert, B'chodesh HaRishon. Chodesh HaRishon is Nisan, Vayeshev, Ha'om B'Kodesh. And the people, they camped in Kodesh. V'tomesha Miriam, and Miriam died there, V'tikovesham, and she was buried there. So here we're speaking about the generation, the new generation, who saw it all. Meaning, although they weren't at Sinai when they were 20 years old, they were less than that. Most of them probably weren't even born at Sinai. It's 40 years later, many of them. But nevertheless, they saw what happened to the Meraglim, many of them, and they understood whenever you step out of line, they see God's reaction, the Midas Adin. And Hashem always came through for them. Whenever there was a problem, he always came through. And whenever they spoke out of turn, they saw the hand of Midas Adin. And yet here, they come, Miriam passes away, but Tikovisham. It's interesting. She dies, and she's buried. That's the beginning and the end of the story. You understand? Miriam, who was a prophetess at the age of 6, who prophesied that her mother is going to give birth to the Redeemer. When Yocheved put Moshe in the Nile, in the basket, she stood at a distance to see what was going to be. She immediately negotiated the deal with the daughter of Paro to find a nursemaid, which was Yocheved, the mother, which Bas Paro didn't know at that time. After the splitting of the sea, she sang Shiro with the women. So she's not an ordinary woman. But again, her glory, so to call, her glorious moments were not during this generation's lifetime. We're not there. So after that, other than the story of the Meraglim, speaking Lashon Hara, which was before the Meraglim, also this generation, they may have heard about her a little bit, but actively being involved, she was not involved. So they were born, there was a wellspring in place, there was Mun, there was Anei Kavod, the clouds of glory. In what way were they able to appreciate Miriam's value? No, she's a holy woman. But when you're living within the context of the Shechina, you're exposed to the Mun, and you're exposed to the Anei Kavod and the bear, you take things for granted. And they don't know that the basis for the wellspring is Miriam. They don't appreciate it. You know, it's like you have somebody underwriting your whole life, and you don't realize who's underwriting your life. It's just happening. The wellspring is there. Well, you have Moshe Rabbeinu. We're in the desert, Hashem provides. But they don't link the bear to Miriam. So this generation never had an appreciation for who Miriam was. They know. She has a special pedigree. She's Moshe's and Aaron's sister. Her husband's a special man. He's the head of the tribe of Yehuda. Her grandson, Hur, was killed. Her son was killed at the time of the Egel because he opposed it. But in terms of her innate value, they didn't appreciate it. She passes away, she's buried. She's not even eulogized, barely eulogized. V'tomesha Miriam, v'tikovesham, she's buried. But what all of a sudden opened their eyes? Post facto, you know what happened when she died? The wellspring that was on merit ceased immediately. So now only in retrospect do they realize what her value was. That they had, all they had until now, it was due to Miriam, it was her merit. But in terms of to appreciate who she was, they had no appreciation. God gives, you don't ask questions. You know, the Chovos HaLevavos writes that if you focus on just the function of a human being, the brain function, the brain has retention. And because you have retention, you're able to speak and you're able to function in life. What's life? Life is experiences. A person is taught how to speak. So you're taught how to pronounce a letter, a vowel. If you would forget from moment to moment, and the information wouldn't accumulate in your mind, cannot function at all. The whole development of human being is due to experiences, and therefore you have retention, you have evaluation, just the brain function itself. Not even talking about the neurological function. Then you have the neurological function. And then you have the heart, and you have the lungs, and you have the digestive system. Just the body itself, we take it all for granted. You're born, that's the function of the human being. Do you think about it? If a person, only when a person years later gets Alzheimer's or has dementia, whatever it is, all of a sudden now the person, oh, that person has dementia. What about you? You have your function. Do you appreciate your function? We take it for granted because it's natural. Because all people have that function. At a later age, you lose it. But do we ascribe that function to God to be appreciative? We don't. So the whole idea of have a debt of gratitude, to be able to live and function even at the most base level, how beholden should we be? But yet, when you're born into it, you don't appreciate it. Miriam, although the wellspring was in her merit, but they only realized it when she passed away. But when she passed away initially, she died, they buried her, that was the end of the story. But what happens after she passes away? Mayim leida, lishtos. This congregation, this community that was qualified to go into Eretz Yisrael, they didn't have water. Vayikolu al Moshe ve'Aaron. Moshe and Aaron, they're the caretakers. They're the providers. So what happens? So initially they said, Moshe, by the way, the tap has been turned off. We got a problem. So what does Moshe say? Moshe doesn't say anything. So, when you put a call in, there's no water. So at first you're not ready. You're not in the quarrel mode. Because Moshe will fix it. But the moment they saw it wasn't fixed immediately, you know what happened? Vayora v'omi Moshe. The people began quarreling with him. Meaning, we have expectations. It should be there. If you people, leaders, why isn't it there? This is the new generation. And when the old generation behaved this way, what happened? They were penalized. They were punished. But yet, it's a repeat of the old story. Vayori v'omi Moshe. Listen to the story. And they speak almost like the Meraglim. V'yomru lemor, luga vanu gval achenu l'fnei Hashem. We should have died as our brothers died before Hashem. Meaning the generation that passed away with that 39-year period. It would have been less painful. Hashem should have taken us out over that 39-year period. Every year on Tisha B'Av, they would dig trenches the night before, go into the trenches, and they would announce in the morning, they would blow the trumpets, the living should separate from the dead, and the people remained in the trenches, they cover them up, and then either they traveled or they didn't travel. So their lives were snuffed out, no pain. Here, if they don't have water, they're going to die of thirst. The Gemara tells us, based on what they're saying, that they're envying the death of their brothers, that dying of thirst is one of the most painful, gruesome deaths. They said, now that we're confronted, we have no water, we envy our brothers who died just by being snuffed out. We have to go through this agony, this agonizing, painful death. We're not finished yet. We're going to die. We should have done. They're speaking about who they are. Why did you bring us? The Kal Hashem. What do you mean, why did you bring the Kal Hashem? Who is Moshe? Isn't Moshe God's agent? Isn't Moshe the direct link to God? Why did you bring the Kal Hashem El Midbar Hazeh? What was the story of Korach? The story of Korach, that proved that anything Moshe does is the Dvar Hashem. Moshe does nothing on his own accord. As the appointments of Aaron and Elitzov ben Uziel was pointed to be the prince of the family, of course. And yet they say, why? It was your initiative that you took the Kal Hashem. So these people are believing in God. We are the congregation of God. How did you take us into the desert? Lo Musham. We should die there. Anachnu Bireinu. We and our livestock. I mean, this doesn't add up. Korach with the fire pans seemingly was put to rest over here. You, Moshe, you have some input over here. You know, people when they're frantic, they speak out of turn. They were frantic. You know, it's like I always say, when you raise a child and you never allow the child to fail, and you're always there to catch the child. And now the child's on his own, and you're not there to catch the child. And the child realizes he's in free fall. What happens to that child? He's terrified. Because he never in his life experienced a disappointment, a setback, because the father was always there holding his hand. Never allow him to fail. This generation, their hand was held the whole time. All of a sudden now they're confronted. Miriam passes away. They're left in a lure chair. No water, there's no life. They're speaking out of turn. They're frantic because we'll see over here, there's no reaction. Hashem does not react to their so-called misbehavior. The Yikola Moshe El Aaron. They assemble against them. They begin quarreling with them. And they said, you took the Kal Hashem to die. You know, it's like an immature child who doesn't know any better. He expects everything. Moshe, you're the caretaker. Why isn't that happening? Why are we experiencing these problems? And I said, Hashem doesn't say to Moshe, I've had enough. As he said with the previous generation. They've seen enough, they experienced enough, they should know better. He doesn't say that here. Hashem says to Moshe, take your staff and go to the rock and speak to the rock. That's all Hashem says. He's not faulting this generation. Because this generation, they don't have the background and the experience and the level of maturity that the other ones had. So I always say, fast forward, 2022, this world we're in. This world lives in such a level of confusion. Our children are born into a world, there's such turmoil and distraction and everything not to be understood to what degree. And despite that, Baruch Hashem, they're committed to the mitzvahs. They study Torah, more or less. But compared to what it should be, these people should be off the cliff. And yet, Baruch Hashem, so Hashem has less of a claim against us than he would have, let's say, going back pre-World War II Europe. Because it was a different world then. The background, who they saw, who they appreciated, what their models were. Today, unfortunately, the models we had then, we don't have those models today. The level of distraction today is, in the past, it pales. Everything pales to today's distraction.
Are you still recording?
Yes, another minute. So I'm just bringing out the point, therefore, there's no reaction to this generation. Because this generation doesn't have the experience of the previous generation. They didn't see what the previous generation saw. Therefore, when they spoke out of turn, there was a reaction from God. Here Hashem says, Moshe, go explain it to them. And if you will show them exactly, and they will see my miracle and how I provided for them, then they'll understand and they'll be where they should be. But they cannot be faulted at this point. That they quarreled, it's a misbehavior. It's like a spoiled child. You ask disrespectfully because you believe it's coming to you. It's expected. You're deserving. Okay? You give them at best a slap on the wrist. but there's no serious reaction here. And this is the new generation. So you can imagine. And we find Moshe Rabbeinu failed to the point that because he struck the rock rather than speaking to the rock, he didn't merit to go into Eretz Yisrael. And the Or Chaim HaKadosh explains that if they would have seen that an inanimate rock who doesn't speak, doesn't hear, is now deserving or undeserving, does the will of Hashem. So you people who have the capacity to appreciate and understand, and there is a downside and a very great upside, what would the lesson be? Just being exposed to that level of miracle, the Or Chaim HaKadosh says, it would have actually brought a level of clarity to them that they would have gone into Eretz Yisrael together with Moshe Rabbeinu, and the Beis Hamikdash would have never been destroyed. Because they would have come to a level of clarity, never again to sin, and it would have come, the world would have come, Mashiach would have come. The world would have achieved its level of perfection. But because Moshe denied them this experience, it only came through human intervention, because Moshe had to participate by striking the rock. Being denied that, they themselves had this blind spot, which will remain till the end of time. And therefore Moshe couldn't go in to build the Beis Hamikdash, because it couldn't have been destroyed if he would have. So as a result of that, he didn't cross the Yarden. He didn't cross the Jordan. But you understand the value of that experience. To be able to see the rock giving water without any human intervention, just by speaking to it, the takeaway would have had such an overwhelming impact on us. Mashiach would have come right then, and they would have all gone in. But because Moshe denied them, so therefore the claim against Moshe, he said, you had the ability to sanctify my name. The sanctification would have been, because the Jews would have been, this generation would have been another level. And if they would have been at that level, the world would have achieved its level of perfection, but because you did not, therefore you're the cause that they were denied that.